overcoming poverty, burning off stress, paying attention with ADHD, building a career, beating a painful genetic disorder. After 13 years of helping others do the same, fitness became a foundation for my life's greatest gift and challenge, becoming a father. My name's Alex Van Houten, and I believe that what I eat, how I move, and what habits I live by are the rock upon which I build my physical, psychological, and spiritual well-being. And whatever I do will rub off on my kids and my community. Welcome to Defining Dad Bod, where we work to untangle the messy knots of the health and fitness industry as if your children's lives depended on it. Because they do. This is where we decide to make our bodies stand for something bigger than ourselves. This is where we find practical wisdom to live by, one powerful conversation at a time. May the words spoken here inspire you to keep moving forward no matter where you are. Who knows who you could be if you could become 1% better every single day.
We can do the show thanks to the support of listeners just like you. For more information how you can become part of the inner circle, go to findingdadbod.com/inner circle. That's findingdadbod.com/inner circle.
What's up, guys? This is Alex Van Houten with Defining Dad Bod. I hope you're doing super well. Today, I'm super excited for you to hear an awesome conversation that I got to have recently with Layne Norton. Now, if you don't know Layne Norton very well, he's run in health and fitness circles for a long time, primarily in physique and bodybuilding competitions and powerlifting. And he has a reputation in the industry as a PhD of nutrition sciences, to love to take the bro science types to task. Funnily enough, we were introduced via social media when I put out a post saying that I would love to debate somebody who is interested in talking about whether or not counting calories was the key to leading a life of health and fitness. If you've followed the last 4 or so episodes of Defining Dad Bod, you know that I've worked hard to help people understand a different way to look at their nutrition plan. With so many people working to count calories and not seeing the results they'd like to see, I've worked really hard to differentiate the idea of building a long-term version of you that's sustainable, healthy, and enjoyable, rather than making yourself a slave to thermodynamics. And so it was a lot of fun when people on the internet, as they sometimes do, took my statements out of context and then looped in Layne as the guy who would, quote, crush me in a calorie science debate. Well, Layne took me up on the offer to get on the show and talk it out, and this is the resulting conversation. I'm really excited for you to hear this conversation. First, it's very apparent to me that there's an amazing amount of nuance, even within the scientifically adherent coaching community, in how we approach nutrition coaching. And if for no other reason than to make it apparent to you as a listener that there is so much nuance, I'll be able to rest a happy man tonight. But the other reason that I'm really excited about this is because as Layne and I get into the weeds of where we disagree and agree on the usefulness of calories as a construct, we touch on several subjects that I believe are worth an entire show in and of themselves. Things like the role of psychological willpower in making habit changes, or whether or not there are good foods and bad foods, and if that black and white thinking is the way of the future, or if there might be a better, more moderate way to think about our nutrition. I'm excited about how this series is turning out, and I know that more public conversations need to be had like this, so that we can find what the sticking points are in the health and fitness industry and begin to move past them. I hope specifically that you hear today the emphasis between different types of goals. The short-term goals, like getting in shape for a trip that's coming up, or for a specific set of pictures that you're really interested in looking great for, versus long-term goals, like keeping up with your grandkids, getting off of medications, having consistent energy, and creating sustainable lifestyle habits that will help you create a body that's an asset in living life to the fullest, rather than a liability. At the core of it, I think Layne and I want the same thing, and that is to help people navigate nutrition and exercise well. But I think you'll find that we have a few different thoughts around the ways we get there. If you want to look more into what Layne Norton has to say on these subjects, you can find the links to his work in the description below. And if you're interested in my past work on the show about the subject, I would refer you to episode 96 of Defining Dad Bod, What Calories Aren't Telling You About Your Nutrition and Exercise, and episode 99, The Death of the Calorie. And if this conversation brings up some questions for you, bring them to the inner circle, and I'll work them into a Tip Tuesday. Thanks for listening. And now let's talk nutrition with Layne Norton. What's up, guys? This is Alex Van Houten with Defining Dad Bod. I'm super excited to hang out with you today and for our guest, Dr. Layne Norton. I promise, Layne, that's the only time I'll call you doctor today per your request. Layne has several claims to fame, and I don't want to blow too much smoke at him, but he's got his PhD in nutritional sciences, BS in biochemistry. He's a two-time national USA powerlifting champion, pro natural bodybuilder, and author of Fat Loss Forever. I will put the links to all of your stuff below. Layne, how are you doing today, brother?
Pretty good. Didn't sleep much last night, but maybe I was nervous. No, just one of those nights. But overall, I'm doing great. Can't complain too much.
Man, I sincerely appreciate you taking some time out of your week to hang out here. I know I've been following your work for a while, and one of the things I love about what you do is that when you coach people, you're cover your kids' ears if they're listening, because one of the things Layne likes to say is that's not science, that's bullshit. And I like that about him. He puts the science first, but he also doesn't disregard the psychology of his client when he's working with them. And one of the things that you're always talking about is, hey man, like this is the science, this is the way it works. But if your client is in a different position as a coach, if your client's in a different position psychologically, you can't force the science on them. It has to work well for them in their position. So while I've got you here, I just want to knuckle bump you across the country here. Yeah, boom. Thanks for bringing that, because you don't hear that a lot from PhDs, because not all PhDs have actually worked with clients. So keep up the great work there.
Well, I think we tend to get, when you've done a PhD and you've gone, as Joe Rogan likes to say, into the weeds.
Yeah.
You can get to the point, and I've certainly been guilty of this, where you're a hammer and everything is a nail. You know what I mean? And you're kind of looking for every way to put your spin or whatever it is that you kind of have your bias towards, and try to want to implement that. And I think the problem with that is, I've seen, and just like you said, I've seen a lot of educated people say things, and I'll think, you've never worked with anybody, one-on-one, because it's one thing to have an ideal of what should work or what's best physiologically. It's quite another thing to try and implement that, right? So a great example of that is, sometimes I talk about studies where I'll say, if you look at carb restriction versus fat restriction, fat restricted diets actually have a slightly advantageous, if you're, calorie per calorie, about 26 grams of fat loss per day better, based on a couple of metabolic chamber studies. However, if you can't stick to a low-fat diet, it's not really worth talking about, because 26 grams a day isn't really that much. And it's unlikely that what they measure in a metabolic chamber would persist for long periods of time. That would likely get washed up in metabolic adaptation and that sort of thing. So that's one of those things where I think it's really important to okay, well, this is the science, but practically what does that mean?
Right. And I imagine you've worked with this as well. So I've been training for going on 14 years now. We're getting old. And I think you're in the 15-year, 16-year mark, somewhere in there yourself. I can have a lady in front of me who's lost 12 pounds and can't see the difference in the mirror, right? And I want her to stay motivated every day to continue with what she's doing eating-wise, to continue the exercise, because it's working. The measures show it's working. It's doing great. But 26 grams, I mean, I can see a lady like looking at her tricep in the mirror and still wiggling it and going, well, I don't see the 26 gram difference. She's not going to be motivated for sure.
Right.
So let's,
and I mean, there's,
okay.
I was just going to say that there was a meta-analysis that got put out, I want to say it was like 2016, and they looked at a bunch of popular different diets: Zone Diet, Atkins, keto, Atkins. Some people think Atkins is keto. It can be for some, but that's a whole nother discussion. But probably about a half dozen different diets. And what they found was none of the diets were associated with more fat loss success than any other diet. what was associated with success was adherence. So when they parsed out people who were adherent to each different diet, they had very high rates of success. But that's not necessarily, a thought. A lot of people out there really truly believe that the reason that they're not losing fat is because they're not doing this one neat hack, or they're not, that there's this one funny trick or whatever it is. And the fact of the matter is, no, that doesn't exist. You got to find something that you as an individual can make into a lifestyle. And that word gets thrown around a lot and not really given much context. People say lifestyle, lifestyle, lifestyle. In fact, I've seen people say, you got to make this a lifestyle. And then they're talking about something that's completely unmaintainable as a lifestyle. So, one of the things that, not to shameless plug, but one of the things I really tried to do in my book was really put that into a framework of, okay, here's how this can fit into a lifestyle. And I think we did a pretty good job of that. So it always needs to be the context of, okay, here's the science, but then practically what does that mean?
Oh man, you couldn't set up this conversation any better if you tried. So thanks for that. That's exactly what we want to get into today. So I actually made a post on social media, and I follow your work, but I wouldn't consider myself an acolyte. You know how acolytes are, right? Like they follow your work and they're like, oh, I'm gonna fight on this guy's behalf. So my question was, can anybody find me somebody worth debating? And you would be definitely worth debating, that believes that the key to health and fitness comes from counting your calories every day, and not some magical, nutrition utopia where you take this supplement and then you follow this diet and everything works out well for you, right? And obviously no professional who ever works with a client for longer than a year maybe believes that you counting your calories plus or minus your 20 calorie deficit or 100 calorie surplus or whatever you're doing. None of us believe that that's the key to health and fitness. And well, I'll let you speak for yourself in a second. But today what I wanted to get you on and talk about is, what's the realistic differentiation with regard to caloric intake and caloric output versus something like your lifestyle coaching? Like you said, that word gets thrown around a lot. And whether that has to do with the type of goal that we're trying to accomplish with that client. And I don't want to get started on that rabbit trail too. Well, that's not the rabbit trail, that's the trail. But I don't want to get that started on that too far. I actually want to start this conversation with something that you helped to popularize in this industry, which is, you called it flexible dieting. Some people know it as if it meets your macros. And as I understand it, correct me if I'm wrong, in your story, one of the things that was going on is you were in college and competing, and you tried clean eating and calorie restriction. And then what you found is, if you just tried to meet your macros as a poor college student, if you just tried to, get your chicken breast and your oatmeal and whatever to kind of line up with the grams of carbohydrates, grams of fat, grams of protein, that you got great results. And then you didn't reverse diet so hard. You didn't gain like 25 pounds after the show, which is easy to do when you're dieting down and restricting yourself to just this stuff, and you can't have any Poptarts, which apparently you don't really like Poptarts anyway. So
no, I don't. I actually don't.
Isn't that like the bodybuilder trope though? Is like right after backstage is a box of Poptarts.
I think that sprang up because IFYM, or flexible dieting, kind of sprung out of conversations that were had on the bodybuilding.com message boards about, I would say, 15 years ago. And somebody asked me, could I get in shape for a show eating Poptarts? And I said, well, there's caveats, but if you could fit that into your daily macronutrient intake, sure, you could. But again, I mean, like, this is, those statements got taken out of context, of course.
Sure, yeah.
Would I recommend that somebody eat a Pop-Tart every day? Well, it depends. Usually not.
Around here, we say on leg day. On leg day, you could probably make some good use of some Pop-Tart.
Well, I think that the point is that, and we're going to unpack, there's a lot to unpack in terms of the debate about calories and calorie tracking. But if you look at dieting kind of like a budget, right? And some people have bigger budgets than others. There's some people who have really high energy expenditure, whether it be through genetics or they work a really hard job, but they fidget a lot. There's some people who have just really high energy expenditures. And there's some who have very low energy expenditures. Now, if you're somebody with a low energy expenditure, you have to look at somebody with like a constrained budget, right? Somebody who makes maybe $30,000 a year. Okay. If you make $30,000 a year, does it make sense to go out and drop $25,000? And again, I know you can get loans and stuff, but let's just assume cash, Does it make sense to go out and drop $25,000 on a new car? No, because you're not going to be able to take care of your responsibilities of paying your mortgage or your rent or whatever it is, right? Like that's going to eat up a huge chunk of what you do. Same token, if somebody makes $250,000 a year, if they go and spend 50 grand on a new sports car, is that a problem as long as they still put money aside to pay their mortgage and put money aside to save and basically meet all their responsibilities, right? Well, I would argue that no, like that's fine, right? Because they're still meeting their responsibilities. And by responsibilities, when we talk about diet, I'm talking about, vitamins, minerals, fiber, that sort of stuff, right? So if you meet all those and you've still got calories left over, then you can have some fun, right? And I've actually found that can actually improve adherence in some people. Now, there are some people who there's this big debate out there, and this is another thing that's huge to unpack, but essentially people have argued that certain foods are addictive. That may be true for certain people if we're talking about high sugar, high savory, meaning high sugar, high fat, right? The data out there on sugar being addictive is pretty weak. You don't see people pulling out bags of sucrose and just plowing it down, right? So, but things like cakes, cookies, those sorts of things, there are some people who do have addictive behaviors towards those. So when it comes to that, I take it on a very case-by-case basis. If somebody's not able to moderate that, or they have a very binary thinking, then I would say, okay, well then avoid, right? But for me and a lot of people I've worked with, and that was originally competitors, a lot of them had this very binary thinking, which was good foods, bad foods. And the problem when you have that thinking, and they've shown this in studies, is that if you're not going to be able, the competitors tend to be very neurotic and perfectionists. There's actually studies on this that shows this. But that's a large percentage of the population as well, are very perfectionist-oriented type A people. Ironically, I'm not. But what they show is that you can't control your environment all the time. You're just not able to. And you are going to come across those foodstuffs in your day-to-day life for most people. And if you don't have a way of moderating that, it can be very difficult. And what I found personally was that if I got exposed to something like pizza or candy or whatever, I would just binge.
Yeah.
Because it was like if I had just a little bit of it, I would feel like, well, I already blew my diet, so I might as well just have how much I want.
Exactly.
Which in reality...
And people don't know, you have only so much willpower, right? So if something's going on in your life, like work was really stressful today, traffic sucked, your kids are crying, whatever it is, then it's not like exposure gives you the opportunity to make a decision. Like, this isn't really good for me. I don't need to eat that. It's like, you know what? It's been a day. Boom. And as soon as it starts, it's like you've tyrannized yourself for the last week or two, not eating XYZ. And now it's there. And I mean, we'll talk about calories in a second, but there's a difference between a couple hundred calories from a carrot cake and 5,000 calories from a 3-hour smorgasbord,
Right. Sure. And going on a binge because you had, because you like eating a whole jar of cookies just because you had one is like Dr. Spencer Nadolsky says, that's like getting a flat and then slashing your other three tires.
Exactly right. Right.
No, it's okay if you've had a cookie, it's fine. Just account for it and move on. Right.
Right. And they've shown us with studies where they do like desserts, right? So they do, they'll take one group and they'll say, you can't have any desserts. And then they give them 1 day a week that they can have desserts. And then they'll tell one group, hey, you can have some desserts, but you can only have 200 calories from XYZ, right? So they let them do whatever they're going to do just within some constraints. And it seems that the adherence to diets and the overall fat loss from the moderation results better in the person over time. 8 weeks, 12 weeks, 16 weeks, it extends out pretty far, right?
Yeah, on average, if you use a flexible model of control, and I'm not necessarily talking about flexible diet the way it's been popularized, but basically saying that you're not going to hard stop and omit foods, it seems to improve adherence on average. Now, again, I'll always tell people, we start with the average for you, but you're not an average. You're an individual data point, right? So not everybody can do that. I think it's, again, we start with the averages because that's what works for most people.
Exactly.
But then if we've got to get outside that, I mean, I have a gal I've worked with for 4 years where she's allowed certain things, But I've told her no baking, because when she bakes, she ends up eating whatever she cooks, right?
Yeah, there's no moderation.
And in one sitting. So, but if she gets something that's prepackaged, like individual prepackaged things, that actually doesn't set her off, because she opens it up, she eats one, and then she's done, right? So again, I think knowing the averages, but then also understanding the individual is very important when it comes to coaching. And I think that's also one of the things that's made me not get really dogmatic about stuff. I mean, I've been times where I've been dogmatic about flexible dieting and reverse dieting. But if you read the book, like I'll say, you made a really good point about willpower. So willpower is finite. And it's not like you have willpower for your job and willpower for your kids and willpower for your wife and willpower for whatever else and your diet and your exercise. That all comes from the same place. So when do we find that we end up screwing up? It's at the end of the day when we've had a really long, like very few people screw up in the morning. Most people screw up at night when they're highly stressed, they've had a long day, those sorts of things where you're kind of draining down that willpower discipline. So what I always tell people is I want to find the dietary strategy that requires the least amount of willpower from you, so that when you are high stressed, when you are like at the end of your rope, it's still something that you can fall back on and can probably adhere to. Because if you're doing something that requires the maximum amount of willpower right off the bat, it's not going to work. But, for some people, again, I love flexible dieting, and it's been a great tool for a lot of people. But there are some people who that constraint of counting calories or counting macros, that actually plays to their neuroticism and actually stresses them out. So for them, we have to come up with different strategies. So that's where, like, okay, no matter what, you have to have some form of restraint. That there's no getting around that, right? But you can choose the form of restraint. Now, what I'll always tell people is if you're willing to track, whatever you're going to choose will work better. Like if you want to do keto, if you track with it, it'll work better. But it can still work without that. Portion control can work. Weight Watchers counting, but I would argue if you can learn to do Weight Watchers, you can learn to track macros. Intermittent fasting, So for each individual person, the form of restraint could be different, but you still have to find some form of restraint that will work for you. And that is the biggest determinant of what will be adherence and success in diets. So, again, I've kind of gone, I was a clean eater, then I was all the way IFYM, and now I've kind of come back to a little more centered over the years, just because when you work with a lot of people, you learn that if you're paying attention, you learn that there's not really one way of doing things. Now, I do want to be clear that any approach that's working on a physiological level, it is because somebody is expending more calories than they're eating. And you would agree with that, I believe, based on our conversation, that is right. That is the physiological reason.
When you say working, we'll be really clear here. Body composition change, fat loss specifically, right? Because
correct.
That's extremely important because, so you and I both work with people who, sorry, let me rewind. Nobody has ever come to me and said, Alex, I really want to gain fat and lose muscle. Like nobody's ever said that. Everybody who's ever come to me for help from a client perspective, there might be a big, giant myriad of goals, but somewhere in there is I'd like to look better naked, which is lose fat and gain muscle, right?
Yeah.
Or at least maintain it during some sort of change, right? Maintain a certain body composition during a change. So when Layne says it's working, meaning that there's, when a diet results in positive body composition change from a fat loss perspective, he means somebody wants to see fat loss. And the only way to do that is to get rid of the fat that you have on your body through an energy expenditure equation.
I should put a caveat to that.
Sure.
If somebody is very obese or has never weight trained before and they begin weight training, you can have a recomposition effect where you don't really lose much weight. As far as fat tissue goes, you're still in a deficit because what's happening is muscle and lean tissue is requiring more calories for building. And so they're essentially robbing that from fat tissue. So you are, in effect, in an adipose tissue calorie deficit.
Right.
But you may not actually see weight loss on the scale.
I try to talk in this show to help people through the initial phases of training and explain, because recomp is the overarching vocabulary that speaks to the changes that happen in the initial, but it's the initial adaptations like blood volume increase. There's a movement of extracellular fluid to intracellular fluid as your muscles start to turn on, right? Yeah. But you could also be burning fat, which means that you're losing weight and keeping weight at the same time. And what Layne said is you might step on the scale and be at a deficit from an energy expenditure perspective, but you're not seeing a change weight-wise yet. It doesn't make sense to people. I explain it this way. Look, you have 70 to 75% of your body is water. How many calories is in water? 0. When you start talking about the change of fluid in the body and where that fluid's actually going and stuff, that makes up a big difference from a weight perspective. It sounds like that's something you coach.
And that's why it's really important that we have some, people kind of poo-poo metabolic chamber studies because they're very short-term and very mechanistic, but we need that because that's really the only way to be sure when you want to talk about, okay, energy balance and how much fat's being lost versus lean tissue. Those are really the studies that make the difference because people are essentially in jail for several weeks. They're feeding them they know exactly the calories going in and they know exactly the calories going out. Well, I don't want to say exactly because there are detection limits.
Sure.
But within 100 calories.
Within a 10% error. Yeah, sure.
Yeah, within 100 calories, they know how many calories people are expending. So, and we have yet to see anybody violate the laws of thermodynamics. So I think the important thing is, because what originally I think this started out is the value of counting calories as a fat loss tool in terms of a little bit of a debate. And I think it's good that we're going to unpack that. But I think the important thing to highlight to people is if you can lose fat without tracking calories, and you can gain fat while tracking calories. But just because those two things can be true doesn't mean that calories don't count, right? Calories always count even if you don't count them. Now, again, there are absolutely limitations in terms of what you can track, right? Just in food labels alone, there's a 10% error. What I would argue is that, and again, for some people, calorie tracking is probably not appropriate based on levels of neuroticism and those sorts of things, depending on the individual. But I've had pretty good success with it. I would say that is not in terms of long-term fat loss, that is not the end goal. I think it is a useful tool, especially in the initial phases, because most people don't even really know what's in food. They don't have a good idea. If you ask somebody to weigh out a serving of ice cream who's never tracked a portion before, what they're going to put in their bowl is 3 to 4 times what the actual serving size is. If you ask somebody to pour a bowl of cereal and what they think a serving size is, they're going to pour 3 to 5 times what a serving size is. So from that perspective, I tell people I have the highest degree you can get in nutrition, and the most I ever learned about nutrition was when I started tracking, because I learned what a high carb food was. I learned what a high fat food was. I learned what a high protein food was, right? Mm-hmm. I remember just, I'm going to date myself, but this is back in the day before we had apps. Yeah. I just had the complete book of calorie counts, about this thick. Took it to the grocery store and spent about 3 hours just going to the grocery store trying to figure out what foods would accommodate the diet I was trying to do, in terms of protein, carbs, and fats. And, that was extremely educational for me because I learned some of the stuff I'd really like to have, and I thought I wasn't consuming that many calories. Oh, boy, because people will, that's one of the other things is I did a breakdown of characteristics of successful dieters in my book and people who maintain weight loss. And one of the things is they don't snack. They don't really snack. They don't take licks and bites of stuff. People don't count those, right? So they grab a handful of nuts or whatever. Well, a handful of nuts could have 300 calories in it. And it can be variable too, right? That's the problem is until you have had that experience of really tracking, it can be very, very difficult to estimate what's in food. So what I always tell people is it's probably good to go through a period where you're tracking very, very intently and understanding what that looks like. Over time, and if we're not talking about a competitor, right? Because a competitor, there's a certain level of perfectionism you require.
Exactly.
But if we're just talking about somebody who says, I want to lose 30 pounds and I want to keep it off. Okay. Over time, and we have definitions of intuitive eating out there. My definition of intuitive eating personally is someone who doesn't just go by hunger signals. I think going by hunger signals is a really, really crappy way to try to lose weight personally, because our hunger signals are so distorted in this day and age because it's not just physiology. Hunger is a complex array of sociological, psychological, and physiological factors that influence it.
It's just like sex drive. You can't.
Yeah, exactly.
Like if people treated, if you're trying to lose weight with hunger, it's kind of like treating a sex addiction with, I don't know, when do you feel like it?
Right. Yeah. Only have sex when you feel like it. Yeah, exactly. So I think that the point I would make is that what I want my clients to get to, my non-competitive clients, is that in time, they're not like taking a scale to a restaurant and weighing every single piece of food. But what they are doing is they're saying, you know what, I think what I had in that was probably about 40 grams of protein, probably about 60 grams of carbs, and probably about 20 grams of fat. That sort of thing. Now, they're going to be off. They're not going to be perfect. That's absolutely true. But I find that that's typically better than somebody just going, fuck it, right? Because that's what tends to happen is if you don't make yourself accountable in some way, what I see a lot of is people kind of like throw their hands up to the dieting gods and go, oh, I hope this doesn't make me gain fat. Well, if you had a 4-course meal and then the cheesecake at the end, you're going to gain some fat. You know what I mean? Yeah, so that's kind of what I try to get people to work towards is not weighing every single gram of food, but just that experience of doing that so that they understand what is in food, because I think that's a skill and a tool that they can carry with them throughout the rest of their life if they spend, I would say, 3 to 6 months doing that sort of thing. I think it's a useful tool.
I love that. So you said a bunch there that's worth unpacking. So there's 2 primary things I really want to make sure that we get to talk about today. The first is one of the lines in the sand, so to speak, that I draw with people when it comes to caloric restriction and tracking and whatnot, because I agree with you 100% as a tool to understand. You said intuitive eating, that does get thrown out there a lot, but one of the tools to help people understand what they're actually eating, how it's affecting their body, how they feel, how they perform in their workouts, whether or not they're ridiculously hungry the next day, all of those things. One of the tools is tracking. The food journaling, the understanding the protein, fat, carbohydrate composition of your foods, understanding kind of what time of day you're most hungry, and then what happens when you skip breakfast versus what happens when you eat cake at night or whatever. That tracking process is just ridiculously valuable, not just to the coach, so I know what the heck to coach you on, but also to you, because as soon as you start putting your focus and attention on the food that you're eating, changes the entire game. It changes the whole game when you start to own, be truthful. And not to say that my clients come to me lying intentionally, but most people have no idea what they ate this week.
That's borne out by the scientific studies that show that people underestimate what they eat by almost 50%.
Yep, absolutely.
When you tell that to people or you tell that to clients, a lot of times they'll get really defensive because they think you're accusing them of lying.
Yep.
I don't think most people are lying. I think most people are just a really poor judge of what they're eating. And I'll give an example. My wife is a registered dietitian and has a master's in nutrition. We were out to dinner one night and we had one of our coaches, Noah, there. And Noah said, how much do you think this potato weighs? And I looked at it and I said, I'll bet it's about 240 grams. And Holly said, I think it's about 170. Well, we took bets and we took the scale and it was actually 300. So I was measuring, I thought I was actually safe, right? So this potato was 300 grams. She would have underestimated by almost half.
Yeah.
Right? And that's somebody who has a degree in nutrition. So it's not that by saying people underestimate, we're not saying you're lying. We're just saying that we're all really poor estimators of what we eat.
Right. That's how the human brain.
Which is why when people go out, I tell them, whatever you think you ate, just add 20% to it as a cushion, right? Be conservative and then add 20%.
I love that. Hey, I don't know if you knew that we shared this. I'm also married to a dietitian with a master's in nutrition sciences. Maybe
there we go.
Maybe that's one of the reasons that you and I speak a similar language on this respect, because our dinner time conversations are very similar to that. Well, it's been a little different since having kids. I'm sure you've experienced that as well. One of the things that's worth diving into there is the tool of tracking is, unless you're a competitor, it's a short-term tool. Unless you need this, and you spoke, conscientiousness and neuroticism in one's personality can certainly play into this, right? There are even times in my life where I'll spend a week tracking just to make sure that what I'm doing makes sense, and then I can continue to go from there. But in the short term, it's an amazing tool to help somebody get in tune with what they're actually eating, so that you and I as a coach can actually manipulate that if need be, but also so that you as a client can start to intuitively understand your food better. And even with a master's degree and even with 10,000 hours of practice, this is something it's very difficult for the human brain to wrap its head around, especially with our food industries the way they are, so good at putting just about, I don't know, double the calories into everything that would normally exist from an intuitive perspective. So with that being said, I kind of want to make a differentiation between goal types, because I have people who come to me and they say, hey, I have a wedding in 3 months and I want to look really, really good in my pictures forever. Like, okay, great. So there's a difference between training for that goal and somebody who comes to me and says, hey, I've got a 6-year-old and a 5-year-old, and I just haven't felt like myself since starting the business and doing this stuff. I look in the mirror, I don't recognize this guy. And, I want to be the dad who's practicing with them at baseball games and stuff and putting their friends to shame when we sprint across the field. When those two types of goals make their way into my consultations, I tend to approach them very differently. The short-term goal for the wedding, so to speak, or this could be like, I want to get on stage and have somebody take pictures of me for my competition or whatever. The short-term goal lends itself very readily to intense tracking of food intake versus food output. The long-term goal, on the other hand, it's a tool that I would like to use to help you to intuitively understand your food. But my goal here isn't to change your energy expenditure, so to speak. My goal here is to help you establish something that you can bear out for the long term. And so when I approach these sorts of goals, and the reason I'm excited to talk to you specifically about this today is because I know in the industry, there are many trainers who use the short-term tools for long-term goals. And frankly, many clients are coming to me just 100% sick of it. Either they've heard this from this and that, or they've YouTubed this, or they've read this book. And so they're so confused. They're trying to use these short-term tools like excessive intermittent fasting or ketogenesis or whatever to get really good at understanding their hunger in the short term and intuitively understanding their portion sizes. They're trying to apply this to a long-term lifestyle. And the thing that I'm hoping to bring out of this conversation is that calorie counting, unless you're competing, just is not a 5-year plan. What are your thoughts on that? Because I think that really is where, like, you look at the research and stuff, we've got relatively short-term studies on this sort of thing, not just from an adherence perspective, but like you said, you can't stick a human being in jail for a year and see what happens. I really think of it in terms of that difference. Is this a short-term goal? Then we're going to be really intense about this tracking thing. If it's a long-term goal, then we're going to use this tracking as an educational tool, but the goal in the long term is to create something that you can sustain. And I don't know about you, but I didn't get into training because I was ridiculously good at math and really just loved adding things up all the time, right? So what are your thoughts on that?
I think that the first thing is that I'll make another monetary comparison. You don't need a budget to save money, right? But you need good habits to save money. Now, what having a budget does often is it forces you into good habits, right? So if you say, I'm only spending $3,000 this month, and here's where all this money is going, and you stick rigidly to that. If you used to go out and get beers with your buddies, every Tuesday night, and it cost, $75 because you were going to a bar or whatever, and then having some food, this and that, you go, that's a pretty big chunk of my fun budget. I'd rather spend that going and doing something else, or maybe I can come up with something that's free or much lower budget that I can have just as much fun with. So it starts forcing you into good habits. Like you'll read about things with money that you should do, but you kind of go, But then when you have to stick to a budget, then you say, okay, if I want to save, like let's say you're saving for a house. You say, I need to save $20,000 towards a down payment. I need to do that in the next 6 months, right? So you need to save over $3,000 a month. And you say, my budget for spending is $3,000 because I make whatever, $6,500 a month. Well, guess what? If you don't save the $3,500 a month, you ain't getting that $20,000 for the down payment, right? So it's going to force you into good habits. Calorie counting, macro counting is very similar insofar as we know we should eat more fruits and vegetables. We know we should, choose things like salad versus a cheeseburger. That doesn't come home to roost a lot of times until we have the experience of understanding why we should choose that. So when you stick to a calorie budget, and let's say that's 2,000 calories a day, sure, you could have an 800 calorie cheeseburger, a 1,000 calorie cheeseburger, have fun with the rest of your day, right? If you want to hit those calories. So I think what that does is force you into good habits. And I'll give an example. If you do that long enough, even though you may stop tracking calories, those habits can stick. So for example, I went and stayed with Sohee Lee a few years ago for a weekend. We're old friends. We caught up. And Sohee has a master's in psychology. And she works, I don't know if you're familiar with her.
I've followed her work a bit.
Yeah. So she's like, I always watch people's habits. She's like, what was interesting about Layne was he never turned down any of the high calorie food if he was offered it. So for example, she made banana bread. I didn't turn it down. I had a piece, right?
Yeah, of course, as you should.
Right. But she said what he did do was that his default was he had egg whites at breakfast and he had the low calorie butter spray and he chose, diet soda over regular soda and all these sorts of things. So what that does is the reason I'm able to have some of those higher density foods is because my habits and my defaults are low calorie foods, even though I'm eating like 3,800 calories right now because I'm moving up a weight class in powerlifting.
Yeah, I knew those guns looked different.
My wife is like, she's like, why are you still eating fat-free yogurt? Go get some of the good, like really calorie dense stuff, like save us some money. And I'm like, but it's just my habit. I'm just so used to, I go to the store, I get fat-free yogurt, right? I get fat-free Greek yogurt because that's what the habit I got into during contest prep. And that's from 10 years ago. I haven't competed in 9 years. So those habits are still present today. And I want to keep those because if and when I decide to diet for a show again, I don't want my habit to be, I have 5 Snickers bars a day and, like that sort of thing.
That's exactly right.
The point being is that calorie counting can force you into that. And it can be good as an accounting tool, right? So you get somebody who they're stuck, right? They haven't lost weight in a while. And you go, okay, let's take stock. Let's see where you're at. Let's make sure you're really eating what we think you're eating, right? So maybe you've worked with a client for 2 years. They got good results, and now they're kind of at a plateau, right? And they want to go further. Okay, let's take stock. Let's see where you're at. Let's count calories really intensely for a few weeks, and let's see how many you're actually eating. And then if you get in and you say, oh, wow, you're actually eating 2,800 calories a day, you need to make some better choices. Now you know, right? And you said something earlier that I wanted to touch on because I think it's a really good point, and a lot of people don't understand it, is if you look at weight loss in the long term or weight gain, Gary Taubes actually brought this up on his debate on Joe Rogan. If you look at weight gain, it's only about 20 calories per day over the course of, say, 30 years, right? What most people put on in their life. So people say, well, if it's really calories in versus calories out, like, how are you so good at capturing that energy, right? Well, I think the first thing to bring up, and this is where a lot of people go, well, that can't be right, right? If you cut 20 calories out of your diet, I promise absolutely nothing will happen. I promise. But there's a few reasons for that. The first is that people don't, that's assuming a linear weight gain or loss. People don't lose it or gain it that way. They do it in chunks, right? So there's actually some evidence that the vast majority, up to 80 to 90% of the weight we gain during the year is in the holidays. So from November to January 1st, people, I think the average in the adults is like 3 kilos or something like that.
Yeah, like a hibernating bear.
Right. And then they don't take it off. There's evidence that the vast majority of it they keep, right?
Yeah.
So over the course of a year, we're only talking about a few kilos. It's not really that much weight, but it's mostly coming in one chunk, right? So that's one part of it. And the rest of the year, most people are at energy balance. The next part of it is that your body is we tend to think about energy intake and energy expenditure as two independent variables, but that is not true. They are intrinsically linked. So if you eat more food, so like for example, let's just say you were at 100 calorie surplus. Well, theoretically, you would just gain weight until the end of time and be 700 pounds by the time you died, right? Mm. But that doesn't happen for most people. Because what happens is as you eat more calories, your energy expenditure goes up. Mm. So what at one point was a calorie surplus eventually becomes maintenance. Now, it will become maintenance after you've gained fat, right, that you didn't want. And the same thing is true of weight loss on the way down. I think a lot of people intuitively know this because we encounter plateaus during weight loss phases, right? So what you may start out with as a 400 or 500 calorie deficit or predicted deficit eventually becomes maintenance after you've lost a certain amount of weight. That is a completely normal response, adaptive response by the body. A lot of it is a survival response. I read a really interesting paper about it where if you talk about the boundaries of the two ends, so we have kind of a semi-tight regulation on body weight. We think through a hormone called leptin, kind of like a thermostat. If you start to lose weight, your metabolic rate decreases due to decreased leptin in part. Whereas if you start to gain weight, leptin goes up, hunger goes down, energy expenditure goes up, and it caps you. So why do people become fat? Well, if you look at the two boundaries, losing too much weight results in starvation, death. Gaining too much weight results in increased risk of predation. If we're talking about evolutionarily speaking,
Paleolithic man, yeah.
Become so slow that that bear, that tiger can chase you down, right?
Right.
Well, if you look at the last 50,000 years, in the last 10,000 years, the risk of predation has become pretty darn low since we learned how to use tools, right? Now, every year you hear the story of man in Florida eaten by an alligator, but for the most part, we haven't had to worry about that for several thousand years. Now, the risk of starvation is still a very, very, very real thing, even in certain parts of the world, and even in the United States up to, a few decades ago. So in terms of the impact of which is more impactful on our genetic code and genes, the body is going to defend against starvation a lot more than it's going to defend against increased risk of predation.
Right.
So that's why it seems to be harder to lose weight than it is to gain weight, and why it seems like we have a tighter regulation on going down. So again, and a great example of this is taking people who have bariatric surgery, who can only eat or are only supposed to eat 1,000 to 1,200 calories a day because of how small their stomach is. Very few of them get really lean. Mm. You know what I mean? Even though that's because that low amount of calories eventually becomes their maintenance calories. Now they lose a lot of weight, but it eventually becomes their maintenance calories. And so that's where it's really important to know that it's not two independent variables. Energy intake influences expenditure. So bringing it back to the beginning, when we talk about like a difference of 20 calories a day, if you just ate 20 calories less a day, even if you actually got that right, because again, that's well within the error ranges of just tracking in general and your energy expenditure. I mean, that's basically just you didn't walk across the office an extra 10 times. You know what I mean?
Right.
So even assuming that you could get that exactly right, what would happen is after a few weeks, your body would likely just adjust its adaptive thermogenesis to meet that.
Right. And internally, it would regulate to meet the intake. Previous conversation with Dr. Adrian Chavez, he came on and we talked about some of the issues with measuring calories. We compared, people think of your body like a bathtub, the amount of water coming in versus the amount of water coming out. And he said, yeah, it's more like there's a 5-year-old splashing around in there too. So the more water you stick in the bathtub, the more the 5-year-old can kind of splash out. And there's kind of a chaotic equation to the whole thing because there's so many chemical reactions happening in the body that it's an intelligent system. in and of itself. I was hoping to get to one more thing today and get your thoughts on it as well. And this comes in my mind when we're coaching the long term versus the short term. It's the idea that, and we could explain this in thermodynamics as well, but I don't know how much you care to get into entropy, but it's the idea that the body's not necessarily a car, so that our food coming in is fuel versus the food coming out, is exhaust or whatever. A car's engine is a fixed thing, right? So the fuel that it burns, mugs up the engine and stuff, but when it's all shot, you just get a new car or do some maintenance on it. Your body's different in that not only is it using the food you eat as fuel, but it's also using the food you eat as the building blocks to rebuild the engine at the same time. And so when you start looking at the long-term, not just the math of metabolic changes that happen in the body with regard to calories, but that the quality of the food that you're eating may, in fact, in the long term, change the quality of the engine that you actually are building. I like to say to people, which engine do you think is worth building yourself out of, or which building block, 100 calories of spinach or 100 calories of Skittles? Obviously, from a macronutrient perspective, those are very different. But the point is, everybody intuitively knows that spinach is going to build a better engine out of you, or a better house, or however you want to think of it, right? Even though the energy is the same from both of those. So when we look at the long term, I try to help people understand that if you're wanting to be around for your grandkids and you're wanting to sprint against your 6-year-old and stuff, we can use calories as an understanding and tracking tool to help you intuitively regulate your amounts. But you also need to start making some decisions about what you build yourself out of. If you look at your finger, in about 3 to 5 years, every single molecule in your finger is going to be different. You're literally going to build a new finger. And what are you going to build yourself out of? And that's everything that you put in your face for the next 3 to 5 years, right? And so when I explain that to people from a coaching perspective, it gives them a little tool in the immediate when they have willpower, not all the time, but when they have willpower to say, is what I'm about to do worth building myself out of? Yes or no? And those little tiny things like eating a protein bar every day for breakfast as opposed to, I don't know, making some dang eggs, dude. Or to have your Starbucks latte at 2 p.m., whether or not it fits into your calorie composition. Do you really want to build yourself out of their dirty chai latte? I'm not sure. So the point is, when people think like that, I find some pretty powerful adherence, not only dietarily speaking, but also I'm interested in the idea of what our food might be beyond calories, not just in terms of micronutrients and stuff. What are your thoughts on that front? Because the challenge in research is that nutrition studies can't be that long term in a controlled setting. 3 to 5 years, like what are you going to do? Like how are you going to measure the quality of somebody's cellular composition based on the omega-3s versus omega-6 fatty acids that they're eating? There's really no way to look at how that changes long term. So what are your thoughts there?
So this is where we may have a little bit more difference.
Yeah.
Not insofar as that I would say you should eat Skittles instead of spinach.
Sure.
I would argue that. And in that particular case, I would say, well, it's a little bit apples to oranges only because spinach has a lot more fiber. And so that's a big difference, sure, right? And also going to influence your energy expenditure.
Well, and a lot of people don't know this. Spinach has way more protein.
Yes, right. So it's a difficult question. I don't want to say that. So when I went to grad school, I wanted to find kind of special properties to food.
Yeah, the magic food.
Because if I could, I would have been very rich man.
Yeah.
Every study I've looked at kind of really trying to look at like very small nuances and difference of food in terms of like processed versus unprocessed. Now, I will say there is some research to suggest that the more highly processed something is, the more easily you're able to extract calories from it. So there may be a difference insofar as that. But like organic versus non-organic, trying to get down to the nitty-gritty, when you control calories, omega-6s versus omega-3s, when they do show differences, they're not really big, right? So it's kind of like, I don't want to go as far as to say, just hit your calories, protein, carbs, and fats, and micros and minerals, and say that there's nothing inherent about the food that could make it special. But I always try and keep in mind the big picture. I don't think what you tell people is wrong. I would just, and again, I don't know what you tell clients. If I was saying something like that, I would put it with the caveat that you just don't want them to create a binary thinking, right? Where it's, oh God, I had a pack of Skittles. You know what I mean? Like,
sure.
I'm going to screw up my whole body. Because I mean, as silly as it may seem, there are people out there who really believe that they're giving themselves poison if they just have like, a little bit of candy or a little bit of sugar or something like that. That's not a really helpful mindset either, because it's not really reasonable.
Yeah.
So I think that trying to emphasize the point of high quality, nutrient dense, meaning a lot of fiber, a lot of vitamins and minerals, I think that that's a really good starting point, as long as the caveat is in there that, listen, if you have some of these higher empty calories or whatever, it's okay to sometimes do that.
Sure.
As long as you're not making that your habit, right? As long as that's not your habit.
Well said. Yeah. I like to say on the show, and my listeners know, I'm not a purist by any means. My son and I love French toast. I enjoy Kentucky Four Roses bourbon every once in a while. You are what you consistently do. So if you're consistently consuming food that's great for you, as you were saying, hey, I had my banana bread, but I had some egg whites and stuff. I kind of offset that way, and it was good for me. And I think when I approach the industry, I want to help people. I want to educate them on their portion sizes. Obviously, I want to educate them in a way that's going to result in not only calorie deficits and surpluses that will reduce the fat and increase muscle, but I also want to bring an ethos or philosophy to food to help people really balance this. And I guess we come full circle here, this magic fad diet crash yo-yo way of doing nutrition, because my why here, I'd love to hear your why if you don't mind as well, because I didn't actually get to ask you about that. We got right into the business. My why is I want to pass on something sustainable to my kids. I want to pass on habitually speaking, exercise wise, it doesn't matter to me if they're the elite athlete or maybe a registered dietitian someday, but it matters to me that what we do in our house sets them up for success in the future. And that's how I coach, my demographic of parents. And I don't know about you, man, but carrot cake makes life worth living sometimes, and so, hey, I might not be building my house out of carrot cake all the time or Skittles all the time, but right. That if what we do the majority of the time is good for us, builds a good body, perhaps in the future, my kids won't be wrestling with cardiovascular disease, and maybe that'll rub off on their community and whatnot. But I want to make sure that you get the last word and stuff, but I'd love to hear from your perspective when you approach your client coaching. And I know this evolves, you've been in this industry long enough that you probably approached it one way, evolved over a few years and stuff, and now you approach it another way. What's your why? What is it that you're trying to bring to the table for your people?
Yeah, my why is that I want them to be happy, in terms of like, one person's happy could be different than another person's happy. I mean, some people, they just want to lose 10 pounds. Some people, they want to be shredded and get on stage. I want to make either of those goals happen for the people. I also want people to, I guess, coming from the competitive background, I just saw so many people who beat themselves up because of food. So I probably come a little bit from a different direction than a lot of people, where I saw a lot of people develop and struggle with eating disorders. And so I give a big talk on flexible dieting. One of the things I say at the end is like people, like everybody worrying about all this little stuff and all the, all right, maybe like the food dye isn't the best thing that you could have, or some of the processing isn't the best thing you could have, even though there's no evidence that it's, inherently dangerous, but it's healthier than an eating disorder. I can tell you that. Okay.
Well said.
It's always trying to put things back in perspective. And I want to kind of take the fear out of food. We have a lot of fear-based media on food. Sugar is toxic. It's going to give you cancer. Fat's going to clog your arteries. Like the what the health stuff, casein protein is heroin, it's like, if you went by all the Netflix documentaries, I mean, what you'd be left with is basically, you can't even drink water, because that's bad. You could drink coffee, essentially, but you can't eat anything.
Cardboard and soy-based chicken, I guess. Yeah, like you can't eat anything because everything's going to kill you. And that sells a lot of movies and books, but it doesn't help our society. Like all that does is make people throw their hands up in the air and go, I don't know what to do. And they end up just bouncing from one fad to the next. And it also creates an isolationist period where what I struggle with a lot is just like, I'll just watch,
keto zealots and vegan zealots like barking at each other all the time. And I'm thinking, you guys are the exact same people. You just, one of you picked one religion and one of you picked a different religion. You know,
well said.
I think certain diets have certain advantages and disadvantages. I just want an honest discussion about why these changes happen, right? And I feel like today was a really good one.
Thanks, man. I appreciate you being here.
But unfortunately, there are some people in this industry who really prey upon the desperation of people and are willing to sell them whatever those people want to hear. So
there's so much money. Yeah, there's so much money in the fear and confusion for sure.
There is. There really is. There really is. And my why is really trying to create as much awareness and take the fear out of food as I can so that we can start having an honest dialogue about what matters and what's needed to really positively impact health in this country. But, you know, these fear-based campaigns, they don't do anybody any good.
So well said, man. Hey, I knuckle bumped you at the beginning. I want to knuckle bump you again. I think we're on the same mission there, but I appreciate that. Yeah,
and unfortunately through the, you know, like people originally pointed me to you as somebody who's saying, this person's saying that calories in, calories out doesn't matter. And, you know, typically if you're an intelligent person, when you get on a discussion, you're always closer than you think you are. You know what I mean? And that's what I figured would happen, you know. But unfortunately, you know, a lot of times you only have a limited time frame to give your message, or people just, you know, take a snippet out of your message and send that to somebody else, right? Like my Poptart thing, saying people can get in shape. Layne saying people should eat Poptarts and get in shape doing that. But that's not what I said, right? But people love drama and all that kind of stuff. So, you know, I think that these sorts of discussions are really important. And, you know, that's also like when Dom and I were on Joe Rogan, like people said a lot of people said that was the most useful nutrition discussion they'd ever heard.
Such a good conversation. Yep.
Yeah, because, you know, Dom and I were 95% of the way there. You know what I mean? So, and I think when you talk to most scientists who don't have a big vested interest in kind of one specific diet, you hear pretty similar things.
That's exactly right. If it's okay with you, I'd like to give you the kind of the last word and make sure that if there's anything that you want people to take away from you here, that they get to. But I just wanted to say that I appreciate that ethos from you, because I've worked in the industry for a good period of time, and there's so much money in the fear and confusion, and there's so much misinformation out there that at the end of the day, you know, I look at my family, I look at my extended family, my community, and I'm here in Arkansas. We're the third fattest state in the US. All right. And people are so confused about what they should be doing that they just don't do anything different.
Right.
You know, so
paralysis by analysis.
Exactly. And so I look at that and it's heartbreaking, man, because you see just an enormous waste of human potential. Not saying that people are an enormous waste of human potential. I see that there's physiological ramifications to poor nutrition practices and poor exercise practices. And then people will work hard for a few weeks and get discouraged and get confused. And then they just, you know, they're done and they buy a new program or they try again next January. And I think we can do way better than that. And unfortunately, there's not a whole bunch of money in that. There's not a whole bunch of money in saying, hey, let's fix this so that we don't have to do this forever, you know? So I appreciate somebody else who's on that page, man. And I appreciate you coming on the show, openly willing to discuss intellectual items and whatnot. I want you to keep fighting the good fight, and I'll do the same.
Awesome. Thank you.
So from that perspective, I'd love for you to just leave our listeners with your last thoughts. If they don't hear anything else from you today, what do you want them to hear? And I'll make sure that I plug your official site link in the show notes here, as well as a place where people can grab your book and whatnot. Fat Loss Forever. Sounds like it's a great read given the conversation that we had today.
Yeah, I mean, my best-selling product is a book, and I wish I had some magic supplement to sell. You know, I'd probably be in a lot nicer office if I did. We'd have some glass windows and, you know, look out on the ocean. But it's kind of like, again, I'll make another monetary comparison. You know, telling people what actually works for accumulating wealth isn't really sexy. It's, okay, you're going to have to work really hard, save money. If you don't have a huge income, like way outside the normal, it's going to take a long time. You're going to have to save money. You're going to have to be diligent. And you're going to have to live within your means, you know, and make wise investments. Are there people who kind of hit the jackpot and bet on single stocks with large amounts of money. And yeah, but that's really rare. And more people lose big than they win big, right? But that's not sexy. That kind of stuff isn't sexy to tell people, right? What's sexy is, oh, hey, make 6 figures a year, sitting at home working 2 hours a day, right? Make $40,000 in a month flipping houses with this weekend course, that kind of stuff. Guys, there's no magic out there. If it was easy, everybody would do it, okay? The reason that people don't get to upper tiers of any different discipline is because as you go up the tiers, the difficulty increases exponentially, right? So if you want to have an amazing body, you better have an amazing work ethic, all right? If you want to have a good body, good work ethic, all that kind of stuff. It's all proportional. So I think what I would leave you with is that understand that wherever you are in your health pursuits or your fitness pursuits or your fat loss pursuits or whatever it may be, everything is a choice. Everything you do is a choice. And you may not always be in control of everything that happens to you, the stress that's in your life, all those sorts of things, but you are 100% in control of how you respond to those things. And if you are in a place where you're doing well, then you don't need to change anything. But if you're somebody who feels like you're stuck in a rut or you can't seem to make progress, listen, I tell this to clients all the time. If you continue to do what you have always done, you will continue to get what you have always gotten. If you want something different, you're going to have to do something different. And again, that is a choice. So take that as empowerment. It is possible to make change. People can change. People do change. It is very difficult, but everything is a choice. And if you make the choice, I tell people, you just decide that you're going to do something and it just becomes part of who you are. People think I have great discipline to go to the gym. I don't. I just do it. It's just part of who I am. I don't always feel like doing it, but I do it because it's what I do, right? I don't always feel like eating certain foods or not eating certain foods, but it's just part of what I do. So when you make it part of your ethos and that is your choice, you have a lot more power that comes back to you. And what you find is that the longer you do it, the more you enjoy that stuff. So keep doing it. I said that my wife is, again, she's deep in contest prep for the world championships. So a little bit different.
Good luck to her.
But I will tell her, and as you get close to a bodybuilding show, for anybody who's ever done it, I realize this is probably not a ton of your population, but you don't have very many training sessions that you enjoy. It is not an enjoyable process. But I've said, this has been your choice to do this. It doesn't have to feel good. You just have to do it. So stop waiting for stuff to feel good. It's not always going to feel good. Disconnect how it feels right now from what you want in the long term. It's not going to feel bad forever. It will get better. So that's kind of my long spiel that I would say. And I put that in about 380 pages in Fat Loss Forever. So if you're interested in hearing more of that, it's all in there.
That's a good word, man. I'm going to leave it at that. Guys, thank you so much for joining us. Layne, thank you for coming on here and having an honest discussion about how we coach clients and what the research says about this sort of thing. And I think more conversations like this need to happen. And if you're game, we'll have you again on sometime soon to, rag on some more magical thoughts in the health and fitness.
Great. Thank you, Alex. Appreciate you having me.
Yeah. Take care of yourself, brother.
The free practical advice and conversations here remain unbought and unbiased thanks to the support of listeners just like you. For more information on how you can become a part of the inner circle of Defining Dad Bod, go to definingdadbod.com/inner circle.